Recording.
Recording now.
There we go. Right, it's my pleasure to introduce Sandy Burbach, who's actually the other half of psychologists that I worked with for many years in the NHS in Somerset, west of England, in the mental health services. Sandy's speech and language therapist and also an audiologist and a music therapist, trained in Cape Town. And you two came over to Britain in the 80s, was it, Sandy?
88, yeah, 88.
In 1988. So you've been working in the field of neurodiversity for 35 years in a special school for quite challenging children, which you once showed me around, which was very interesting. You've developed a brilliant package for working with these children called the Social Communication as Experiential Play, or SCAPE. Is that how you say it? SCAPE? Mm-hmm. You're basically very loyal to PCP, aren't you? But you have sort of used that as a framework to integrate the latest research and practice from neuroscience, linguistics, and enactive cognition, pulling it all together in a package for helping these children and, I guess, training teachers to work with these children. Don't know if there's anything else. Oh yes, I was going to mention that you recently had a paper published with Mike Mascolo in the Journal of Constructivist Psychology called Responding to the Coronavirus, Reinventing Ourselves Through Transformative Problem Solving. So with that said, let me hand over to you, Sandy.
Thank you, Harry. Welcome, everybody. This is entitled When Social Skills Meet Social Cognition. In the early 2000s, I was tasked with setting up a school-wide social communication approach. Hang on, I've lost me. Just a minute. I am trying to share my screen. There we go. Okay. In the 2000s, I was tasked to set up a school-wide social communication approach in a school, and it was for 8 to 19-year-olds with a range of neurodiversities and complex needs. To be honest, neurodiversity is a bit of a catch-all term, referring to children and adolescents with a wide range of developmental, cognitive, sensory, emotional, and relational differences. And it's also somewhat politically fraught. So I'll issue a bit of a disclaimer at the moment. When I refer to neurodiverse young people, my therapeutic constructs encompass only those for whom neurodiversity presents an obstacle to living or learning or thriving on a day-to-day basis, and who struggle with a consequent lack of practical independence and relational fulfillment. And so I'm only speaking on behalf of those children, young people, and their families who tell me that the world has proved itself to be confusing or unpredictable and alienating. The common approaches at that time were centered around social skills, social and emotional literacy, and clinical pragmatics. And most approaches implicitly or explicitly acknowledge the need to follow a general scheme of development. And I will show that to you right now when I got it sorted. There we go. No, sorry, I'm messing this up. Hold on. Hit the wrong button. Oh. All right, we'll stick with that one. Okay, we'll stick with that one. Can you see that? Somebody tell me you can see that.
Not yet.
It's not shared yet. Okay, hold on, let me try again. How's that? Better?
Oh, that's coming.
Okay, you got him. Sorry, my internet is playing up a bit. You got it?
Yes.
Okay, good. So the general scheme of development people were following at that time was awareness of self and others, awareness of communication, this non-verbal skills, verbal skills, and assertiveness skills. And this was developed through play, worksheets, and conversation. Unfortunately, though, there seems to be an unpredictable amount of skills transfer between therapy and real life. And a lot of people were saying to me, they can do it while I'm there, but they can't do it when I'm not. And on the surface, this may sound like a typical stage and skills acquisition with, needing a modification in levels of scaffolding or increasing autonomy on the part of the child. But relational and social development is not as easy to task analysis than as maths or reading. I mean, how do you scaffold spending time with granny or playing with cousins or knock-knock jokes? And then when I went and had searched, there was a dearth of discussion on the implications of the levels of intersubjective development on social cognition in this population. Now, working with neurodiverse children involves the implicit acceptance that every child in the room has a different experience of being in the world from birth and will have developed idiosyncratic systems of knowledge and cognitive strategies. And delivering group therapy to neurodiverse children immediately raises demands that go to the heart of what it means to live with neurodiversity, mainly sustained joint attention in spite of different measures of salience or shared meaning despite perceiving or tolerating different sensory stimuli, or a consistent inconsistency in cognitive function, which allows for perspectival change or shifts and change. And finally, most commonly, working cooperatively to complete tasks in the face of ideational motor praxis problems. I couldn't for the life of me see why getting them all to do the same worksheet was going to make a significant difference. And the only programs that addressed some of the earliest processes in intersubjective development were play-based language development ones like Portage or the Derbyshire Language Programme, and parent-child interactional training like the Harnan and Skirts. And there was nothing for middle childhood or early teens. Clinical assessment of neurodiversity, on the other hand, was positioned around sensory processing and functional skills, and auditory processing of speech and language. And while play was identified as one of the 3 diagnostic tells, it wasn't incorporated in a sort of somewhat haphazard way when working with older children. And when I asked my social skills group what their daily, what social skills meant to them in their daily lives, I got a sort of resounding not much. They identified problems around language comprehension, memory and sequencing, context, multisensory information processing, executive functions, and motor and organizational praxis, personal construal and intersubjective meaning making, and change and cognitive shift, which are all areas of difficulty identified in formal standardized speech and language and occupational and academic assessments. The other question I asked concerned what they would change about social skills provisions if they could. And apart from the inevitable, I would just be normal and not go to therapy, their themes pointed directly back to the same underlying perceptual and cognitive developmental differences and personal constructs. In fact, there was an enormous theoretical and therapeutic gap between disordered information processing and disordered social communication. And there didn't seem to be anything to bridge it. And suddenly poor skills transfer was the least of my concerns. It seemed to me that we needed to revisit something like this. All the levels of intersubjective development, but linked with the cognitive things that were getting in the way of children learning and interacting on a basic level. So the problem seemed to be that the resources for middle years and early teens were all positioned within shared symbolic and relational levels, these of intersubjectivity, while the underlying cognitive and sensory issues that affected my students' experiential meaning making were impacting at these levels, at the foundational levels of information processing and construal. And when I reported my thinking back to colleagues and students, I was met with, well, write one then. I decided that the only meaningful way to do this was if I involved my expert students. So we embarked on a project to create something that spoke directly to their needs, starting with this request. Can we talk about why we are not weird? Now, asking for definitions of socially weird from a mix of neurotypical and neurodiverse young people yields themes of unpredictability and volatility, and both groups feel awkward or embarrassed. There are obsessions with special interests and a lack of curiosity and interest in peers' lives, and not understanding simple stuff, not being able to rely on your brain, and a constant anxiety and a waiting for interactions to fall apart. And this list is at heart a description of incongruent intersubjective experience, which got me thinking. These children spend most of their waking lives with one another. Perhaps we should start by understanding other neurodiverse peers' experiences and re-experience the development of sharing meaning along the way, instead of forcing them into some sort of predetermined form of appropriate or typical. So I went back to Varela and Thompson and Roche's book, The Embodied Mind, and back to Kelly and Vygotsky and various models of intersubjective development, starting with Chapman's epistemic triangle. And my thinking was that if knowing is based in shared experiencing and co-construal of meaning, it might be possible to develop an understanding of the similarities and differences between your own and other experience, if you have a shared starting point and a systematized way of comparison. And this led to a set of working principles around constituting social communication groups on the basis of need rather than age or type of diversity or measure of social competence. So the working principles were these: put sensory and emotional, cognitive and linguistic scaffolding at the center of your system, and develop a way of mapping social context and the physical environment. So you do know where you are and you do know who you're going to be talking to, and reframe change as a perceptual process, and accept all forms of self-regulation as meaningful and appropriate within a group context. So if you need to spin, you need to flap, you need to click, do it, because it's your self-regulation process. And then also use an enactive model of delivery so that you have a congruence between what the child is experiencing, what the child is hearing, what the child's intention and intentional actions are going to be. And then also incorporate the developmental levels of intersubjective development, allow children, and in fact enable them to slide up and down in one session between all the different levels, rather than insisting they work at a linguistic and symbolic level only. And then also incorporate different developmental levels and the types of play. Don't leave anything out, basically. And then the most important thing is to let the session take a life of its own. Now, this means that you start with something called base games, which are the organizing games. They allow the children to understand what the principles are. But at some point in your session, you let the children develop the play, and you as facilitators just go with it. This is quite scary if you're a therapist who's used to sitting around a table with worksheets. But what you're doing as a facilitator is looking for what we call the evolution points in play and taking them and allowing it to run, because then you are playing and putting what you're doing into real life. And then draw concrete and direct connections between social and emotional constructs and their embodied foundations. Solve problems through social interaction, test what you learn in other contexts and with other people, and enable target setting and record keeping for individuals and the group, because this is a school. And I was doing this with Beaver Scout group, so 6 to 8 year olds, in a community music school, so with a whole lot of children who had learning difficulties, one sort or another, and I was doing music lessons with them and general music therapy, and then also in some of the mainstream schools in Somerset and in the specialist environment. So this was happening and being developed in a number of different communicative contexts and a number of different education contexts. So with the advent of Google Scholar, I was also grateful to discover that synchronicity provided me with a community of embodied cognition and enactivism theorists and cognitive neuroscientists who were all thinking along similar lines. My approach was not as maverick as it seemed in darkest Somerset. However, working backwards, as it were, from clinical practice towards theory is a tricky and somewhat overwhelming process. And in the end, you have to have a system that works for your client group, despite the arguments that might be raging in journals. So in 2012, after going through several iterations, I settled on this. And this is a systematizing approach to social interaction, which enables neurodiverse children and teens to participate in mutual sense-making across all levels of developmental intersubjectivity, while evolving in an evolving social context. So those are the base games that move, while scaffolding the underlying embodied sensory and cognitive processes, which facilitate what Kufari and DiPaolo and Diego actually referred to as participatory sense-making in 2015, and I took that term. Scape's processes of participatory sense-making are informed by Hughes' 16 types of play, which embedded in the developmental stages of play, which are consonant with the intersubjective development. And then also combines therapeutic strategies from occupational and speech and language therapy and cognitive and constructivist psychotherapies to enable neurodiverse children and adolescents to co-construe the meaning of their immediate intersubjective experience in interaction. And the system basically forges links between lower order sensory motor sense making and higher order linguistic social experience, while scaffolding individual neurodiverse cognitive learning needs. So the process of SCAPE is an experiment in sociality, translation, and participatory sense making in every sense of the words. So SCAPE looks like this. There are 4 inactive models. And one of my students, I asked her once why we needed models. She said to walk the talk and do the think, which I think is a pretty good description of inactivism, really. Okay. So there are 4 models, the 12 social spaces, which is a contextualizing model. Where am I? Who am I with? What am I doing? And when is it? And 2 things called the see-say-do triangles, which are organizing. And then the 6 circles models, which is a moderating one. It's really the pragmatic communication aspects. And it's underpinned by the see-say-do triangles. And then there's a solve a problem template, which is integrating and is a model of transformative problem solving, which assimilates all the other models. Then also there are 7 cognitive domains. And these are the ones that represent most of the issues that you will pick up in formal assessments. And then all embedded in Hughes' 16 types of play. And there's a list there generally of what they are. So the point is that any game can go anywhere and become anything. You as a facilitator, there's always 2 of you, by the way, the facilitators need to be able to pick up on the potential of the interactions and then go with it, rather than worrying about keeping control.
When you say 2 people, you mean 2 therapists? 2
therapists. There are always 2 facilitators. This is too big for one person. I've tried it. It doesn't work unless you've got, the maximum you can do with one person is about 4 children. And I'm generally running groups of 6 to 8 and sometimes 12. So you do need 2 people. Now, the point is that SCAPE has everything we do, the models, the games, and the sessions have the 8 overarching process, 8 overarching sort of purposes, really. It's probably best to think of them as the models as a nested set of organizing principles which build towards the next, and they're all used reiteratively, blimey, to underpin the whole process, and which takes 18 to 24 weeks. So we're talking about 2 school terms. And this means that once you've introduced a model, you'll be using it to organize your interactions. And the integrative structure is what allows you to reach these goals: interpreting the context, which is the who, what, where, and when of it; constructing an intersubjective space so that you can co-create meaning, and the spaces are called things so you know which space you're in; enabling construals, so moving between a personal embodied and position towards egocentric and allocentric positions; and creating a narrative which requires episodic working memory and sequences of that, intention, events, cognitive shifts, knowing what those things are and recognizing when you're undergoing them, really, creating an experimental space, sustaining a space to choose. 5 minutes trying time is literally, if you want if you're going to try and do something different, then you can do it for 5 minutes, and if you hate it, you can stop. Now, 5 minutes in Scape is as long as a piece of string, so it can be 30 seconds for one child, and it can be the rest of the hour for another. And it's up to the facilitators to decide how long they've tried for, and then being able to stop. And then enabling change, so saying and doing it differently, and then anticipating the sense making of participation. And this is the most important. Once you're in the room for Scape, you belong in that space. It's the facilitator's task to give you a role, so you always have agency. And this comes from the idea that you are never not communicating. And this is one of the first things that the children understand, is that if you are sitting under a table with your hood pulled over your head and your hands up your sleeves, you are still talking, you're still communicating. And therefore, you will have a meaningful role in the game. I mean, I've had children being the CCTV camera because they're sitting under the table. As long as you can ascribe some sort of meaningful role, then that child is participatory and they have agency, and you can mold the session around each child. Usually children don't stay under the table for very long, luckily. Now, if we were actually doing this properly, workshopping this, I'd play some base games with you and explain as we went. But the best I can do today is to have you imagine. So I'd like to try and give you a flavor of how the models and the domains might be integrated by deconstructing a first Scape session in which I would introduce some of the organizing and self-regulatory aspects of social spaces and the see-say-do model. And then we'll look at a base game somewhere around the 12th session mark and deconstruct it according to the models. You'll come across various incarnations of the 7 domains all the way through. And remember that the entire Scape process can take up to 24 sessions. That's two full school terms. So this is literally just a snapshot. To do this, however, I have to make some assumptions about your sensory motor system and your cognition. Mainly that you have very little problem with praxis, and that you've developed the capacity to ideate and therefore visualize both your own and others' actions and interactions. And also that your vestibular system successfully regulates not only your physical balance, but also the relative intensities and relationships between your multisensory inputs in such a way that enables you to identify and regulate your interoceptive sensations, including your emotions. And finally, I trust that you'll be able to modulate your spatial perception and power and speed and pressure of your physical actions. So if you do get overexcited, you won't accidentally knock your computer or your coffee on the floor. So imagine this. 6 young people in their early teens enter a room to attend a social skills session. To date, their experience of social skills group involves sitting around a large table or a circle of chairs and physio balls. Today, however, the furniture has been pushed back against the walls or removed. And as each person comes through the door, they're greeted by a facilitator and offered a selection of bean bags and mats and school chairs and physio balls and fleece blankets, and they're invited to make themselves comfortable anywhere in the room. A second facilitator is positioned next to the equipment to help dispense it and to answer questions from surprised teens, like, Alfie, can we sit anywhere? Me, yes, wherever you feel would suit your body best. Alfie, can I sit on a table? Yes, of course you can if you'd like to. So Alfie makes for one of the tables underneath the window. He sits on it, swinging his legs and leaning back on his hands. Callum holds up a mat and looks perplexed. Miss, is this actually a dog bed? Me, actually it is. What gave you the clue? Callum says, the paw marks. And it says, been here, chewed that. Why have we got dog beds? Because they're bigger, more comfortable than yoga mats. And I thought it was a bit funny. Callum gives me a grin and goes off to find his space. Ed says, can I have a dog bed too? And I give him one. And he wraps it around his shoulders and makes for the opposite wall. He sits against it, knees drawn up to his chest, enclosed by the mat. Callum has positioned himself against the same wall, but he's arranged his mat to resemble a deck chair and he's sitting with his legs stretched out. Every now and then he bends his knees, digs his heels into the mat and pushes back against the wall. Dan selects a rug and a mat and makes for the other table under the window. He lies on his belly on the mat, half under the table, with his head and shoulders in the space between the tables. He's rolled his rug up and is using it as a pillow. He rests his head on his arms, but he's turned his face towards the center of the room. He can both see and hear proceedings, despite appearing to have detached himself. Alfie and Dan ignore each other. In the interim, Finn has picked up a chair and placed it under the window closest to the door. He's turned the chair around and straddles it, leaning over the backrest. He's quietly drumming a syncopated rhythm with the palms of his hands on the backrest. Ben appears to be uncertain about where to place himself and is hovering awkwardly between Alfie and Finn. I ask him if no place seems quite right, or if he would prefer to move about rather than stay in one place. Ben's most surprised that this is an option, but he agrees that the movement would suit him best. And we identify that the longest open stretch is along the wall, next to the door, and Ben takes up a position in the corner between Ed and the door. I ask Ben to be aware of Ed's proximity and to avoid stepping on him. Ed spreads his arms and says, "I'm here!" Ben acknowledges him non-verbally. He's begun to push himself off the corner and rock back rhythmically. Finn and Ben's rhythms are almost synchronous. And the room now looks like this. Notice how each individual's gravitated to the edges of the room and arranged themselves fairly evenly. Each child has effectively laid claim to their territory and they've set about making themselves comfortable in it. The instruction, make yourself comfortable, has given them permission to act differently to the way they would usually conduct themselves if they were sitting in a traditional social skills circle of chairs or round a table. Comfortable is an embodied construct encompassing a state of physical, emotional, and psychological regulation. They've all initiated an autonomous strategy for this. I've not needed to do anything apart from facilitate the process. And they're also primed for a first introduction to the models and the domains of scape. Now take a moment to decide how you would construct comfortable for your body in this room. The goal of the first session is not to create a group. So you won't be setting group rules. You won't be giving your group a name. You won't learn people's names or share biographical details. It's solely and entirely centered around enabling participants to feel safe and regulated in a strange place with new people and new objects. Any interpersonal engagement is entirely on individual terms. As I said, you can stay under a table with your hood pulled up and your sleeves pulled down if it helps. As 11-year-old Toby once said, anything can happen in Scape, and generally does, but it's still just Scape. He then said, how do you do that, miss? This means that your first session may consist entirely of participants testing and rating how changing the position of body parts changes the feeling of comfortable. There's plenty of yoga and martial arts exercises to create infant-level exploratory play games with. And it's very easy and restful to explore basic epistemic triangle relationships between see, say, and do. Shape and coordinate movement to meaningful gestures and synchronous actions without much, if any, verbal communication between participants. Everybody is still experiencing intercorporeality, co-regulation with some joint attention and joint action thrown in. What you do and how you do it depends entirely on your particular mix of children on that day. That's why you have 2 people and 4 sleeves to keep ideas hidden up. Right, back to today's group. I would be saying to them, so you've made yourself comfortable. At this point, you may be wondering why there's a masking tape triangle stuck to the carpet. And you may have probably read the words see, say, do to yourself. And you're even more mystified when I go and stand on the say, literally, physically, and say, welcome to Scape Group. We're going to meet every Wednesday in term time for 1 hour. And this group is your time to explore what your body wants to do when you're with other people and what your brain is thinking about when you're with other people. How to find a comfortable place for yourself in a crowd or an open space. how to find the words to join in conversations when you want to, or to speak without using words, and to understand what other people mean when they say and do stuff. We usually do more than playing than talking to figure it out, and there are no worksheets unless you want to make them. But we'll call her Fran and I will write things on those sheets on the wall to help us remember them. You can write and draw on them too if it helps you. Now on the wall are huge sheets of, well, actually the wallpaper pinned up, and we are constantly moving backwards and forwards, drawing pictures, writing words, whatever is necessary for us to remember the process of the session, but also to physically and symbolically represent what is happening in the room. So the children are seeing and reading what they're also experiencing, which is basically another form of say. And then I say, so does anybody have a question they want to ask? At which point someone inevitably asks me why I'm moving around on that triangle. And then I can explain that I'm making a map of the way my brain thinks about ideas. And if I can show somebody else the map of my idea, they understand better. And also I understand better what they're thinking. And this is the introduction to the model of see, say, do triangle, which is embedded in personal space. And it's this. Now, see, say, do triangle actually arose out of the epistemic triangle and Chapman's knowing. And it's an enactive processing model. It uses something called languaging, which is what it's enmeshing language so that what the child is hearing and experiencing as linguistic constructs is what they are seeing and what they are doing. So it's taking how language works in a general play sense when you're talking with small children at sort of level 1, 2, and 3 of intersubjective development, but being very careful about what you're doing. So you're increasing their perceptual understanding by increasing the amount of cognitive redundancy. You're making sure that everything matches. See matches say matches do. You're decreasing any perceptual noise by taking out anything that is not necessary to the messaging. That way you're focusing their selective attention, and also you're helping them to reconstruct the experience of communicative acts in terms of perception, meaning, and intention. So what you're doing is you're translating the meaning of a personal experience into interpersonal context, but you're doing it in a systematized way. Now, once we've explained that, I will go back to what they're actually experiencing. So what they're seeing, what they're saying, and literally what they're doing at that time. So I will say to them that, okay, I see that you've made a place where your body is comfortable. That's called your safe space. And your safe is a good feeling. And in escape group, you can always go back to your safe space and get comfortable even in the middle of a game. Your body will tell you if it wants you to get safe, and your job is to listen to it and do what it wants. I notice that you've all got different ways of making yourself safe. Some people like to be high, some people like to be under, some people moving or stretching or curling or leaning and pushing, tapping. As I'm saying each of these verbs, both facilitators are mirroring the words with gestures. In other words, doing, see, say, do. What they're hearing me say is what they're seeing me do. Diego and Cufari Di Paolo and Diego called this languaging, and it's a distinctive feature of interactions with infants at secondary, intersubjective, and shared symbolic levels of social development. So what I'm creating is an enactive framework for languaging, but with older children. So putting them back into that position in a way that is still fun and meaningful to them. Now, while we're doing that, we're watching them and looking to see who's looking at us and who's looking at peers. And this is where you have an evolutionary play point, because depending on the level of interactional engagement, you might pick up on incidental or intentional nonverbal actions of participants and then encourage other children to try them on like clothes. So see what Alfie's safe feels like. So if everybody assumes Alfie's position. Really what we're doing is we're also initiating empathetic perception, which in SCAPE is called sensory empathy, because empathy is built up from sensory perception in SCAPE. We go right through. And alternately, I might pick up on Ben and Finn's rhythmic cues and do some body percussion work and explore which actions are soothing and on which part of the body map. Then at some point you plead exhaustion and ask everyone to go back to their safe space and their comfortable position, which is basically asking them to go and self-regulate. And we then establish a basic geography of the room. In other words, we introduce the social spaces model. And we'll say something like, this whole room is shared. We share it with each other. It's a shared space. And your safe space is inside the shared space. We can all see where a safe space is because it has an edge. And no one can cross that edge and come into your safe space unless you invite them. So I might roll a ball across the floor and it'll hit the edge of the mat. And I'll say, see, that's your territory. This edge keeps me out. So we have a shared space and a safe space. But there's something inside your safe space. That's called your personal space. It's your body. Your body is your personal space. It belongs to a person, so it's personal, and it's also person shaped. And then I'll probably lie down on a large sheet of wallpaper and have Fran draw around me to show people that my personal space is person shaped. I can make my personal shape smaller or bigger by stretching or curling up. And your personal space grows with you. It starts off baby sized and turns into adult size. Now look at Fran and me, who's got the biggest personal space? And then we'll go on to say something like, this is the edge of Fran's personal space. Our skin makes our edge. If I touch her skin, I'm in her personal space. Most of the time we keep out of each other's personal space, but sometimes we let them touch, and then we will enact a handshake and a hug and holding hands, literally doing what we are saying. And then there's a game that we might play, which is a giving game. So again, you're giving into give and take and turn taking. Giving is a way of connecting up our personal spaces without touching. So for instance, we may take a huge physio ball and pass it from one person to the other. And that's going to be a moment, again, where you have an evolution, because physio balls are big and you can drop them. So if you drop them and they bounce, you just change that. You just turn that into the game where you start to bounce it to people. The point is that the ball goes from your personal space to somebody else's personal space, possibly with a bounce in between, or just with a throw, or just with a pass. Children are then re-experiencing the idea of handing things to people in a controlled way. So that's the proprioception. You're also talking about giving and taking, which is the real beginning of interpersonal interactions, because you give and you take. So, as you've probably gathered by now, social spaces is essentially a mapping device. And one of my students actually called it their social sat-nav, which we did adopt as a term. And it's basically, it was developed in response to, when I'm with other people, I don't know what to do. How do you know when it's the right time to use a strategy? And how do you join in? I don't know what to say. And social spaces model consists of 12 contextualizing social spaces. It's divided into two main areas, the personal and the shared space. And the personal is this see, say, do one. It's the first see, say, do model. And it's about what's happening inside your body map. And the children called it their inside self. So that's what it became. So your personal space organizes your attention to internal information processing and regulation. So within your safe space might be self-regulatory. Now that's going to be things like your vestibular, interoception, proprioceptive systems and your executive functions. Listening space, which is where you are listening to what your body is saying to you. So that's interoception primarily, but again, it's emotion. And that again involves your vestibular, interoception and proprioception and your executive functions. Then there's thinking space. Now, thinking space is about first of all, what you're experiencing and the labels you're giving it. So the C, the perception, what you're saying about it, because you're then going to do something in response. But it's also about intentionality and anticipating things and being in a critical state to respond, being in a critical, and we're talking about neural functioning now, critical state to experience something different, critical state to move. And from a cognitive point of view, we're looking at things like classification, hierarchies, how loud is my touch, how loud is my movement, and obviously praxis. And then there's an internal talking space, which is the say bit. I mean, conceptualizing the meaning of your internal experience. You're using possibly words, possibly feelings, possibly a combination of the two, but it's about being self-aware of what's going on inside you. Now, the see-say-do triangle is nested inside personal space, and it effectively is acting as a framework for organizing, classifying, and describing perceptions. Generally speaking, sessions 1 to 6 are sufficient to reframe self-awareness and implement self-regulation strategies and reflection. And these are the ones that are these mostly the sensory motor experiences and concepts that are involved in parallel play. So observing, copying, coordinating, connecting, sharing, and suggesting. So you're in that level of play. Well, you're going through exploratory and parallel play constantly. There's no real limit to how many ways you can revisit and enact these concepts, as they feature at differing levels of complexity in most sessions. So you're just shifting around, really. Now, the next game is played at around session 12. It's a useful way of monitoring individual and group social interaction, as it relies on exercising sustained personal autonomy within a shared space and the ability to take on perspectives of the group. And as such, it's demanding constant shifts between egocentric and allocentric perspectives. And those are the features of the other form of see-say-do, see-say-do 2. So let's play hide and seek. Now, hide and seek involves all the social spaces. And that means all 12 of them. So you've got your personal ones that I've talked about. You've got peripersonal space. Now, peripersonal space is something we actually explore. It is the thing that allows you to catch a ball. It's the space between your body map and the rest of the world. And the children, I explained to the children that your brain does this incredibly clever thing. When a ball comes within a certain distance of your body, your touch sensors in your skin fire as if they've been touched. And that tells you that this object is coming towards your personal space, and you can put out your hand and catch it, or you can bat it away, or you can jump over it. But what you're doing is you're responding to something that is coming into your personal space. And then there are all the shared spaces. This is what they're called. And the last one is the problem space. Liminal ritual working and play all operate with listening, thinking, and talking. So listening, thinking, and talking spaces go from being internal to being interpersonal. And we work on physically recognizing that two people are standing in a talking space and the words are coming into the middle of that talking space. And so you can't cut across it, because if you walk across somebody's talking space, you are going to be a space invader. You're invading their space and you're breaking down their communication. And we do a lot of playing with that. So hide and seek is primarily a game of liminal space. Now, liminal space involves understanding edges, boundaries, and social rules. All spaces clearly have edges, but liminal space systematizes the recognition of virtual boundaries and the processes of entering and leaving. So joining interactions and joining conversations, joining a game, also of joining attention, joint attention, of pushing boundaries, crossing the line, breaking rules. It's got its root in classification processes such as categorization, what space you're in, whether you're out, whether you belong, whether you don't, whether that object belongs with that object in that space. And it's also has its roots in assimilation and set shift and neurofunctional critical states, because to step into a space, you have to be in a critical state in order to enact, to make that happen. So liminal space is construed as transitional. It's the place where choices and decisions are made, and it's demarcated by a line to be crossed as you move from one state to another. It's also closely bound up to ritual space. Ritual space is a space between two people that has been created in which you enact the forms of greeting or ritual acts or partial social acts that require a completion to have full meaning. So if I stick my hand out and you don't stick your hand out, my partial act is incomplete. I've initiated a ritual space, but you've not closed it. You've not done the other thing that should be coming back towards me, a bit like passing balls backwards and forwards to each other. So liminal and ritual spaces have temporal features as well as behavioral and cognitive ones. So you can take too long to make a choice. You can take too long to respond to greetings or pass the scissors. You can also leave all sorts of social overtures as incomplete. And this disrupts social interactions and changes interpersonal perceptions of predictability. And weird is often a measure of difficulty within these two spaces, because people become unpredictable. They don't finish the act. They don't do what you expect. So the other thing is, to play hide and seek, all players need to be able to perform the episodic set piece sequences. In other words, the rituals involved in the game. So counting from 1 to 50, coming ready or not, crying, shouting, "Found you, Ben," or running towards home and then hitting the wall and going home free. So hide and seek begins by establishing the rules and delineating the boundaries of the play space. So the rules of hide and seek, if you're playing the full version, as far as I know it, and different people know hide and seek in different versions, but the way I know it is that you have a hider and you have hiders and you have one seeker, and the hiders all go and hide, and the seeker counts from 1 to 50, for instance, then shouts "coming ready or not," and then goes to look for them. And there's a place designated as home. And if you can sneak out of your hiding place and run for home without the seeker seeing you and running and catching you, and you hit home and you shout "home free," then you are not going to be the seeker next time. But if you get caught, you automatically become the seeker. Those are the general rules that I've played hide and seek, and lots of children play hide and seek on their different versions. And obviously you'll scale it up and down depending on the needs of your group. So you start by establishing the rules, and delineating the boundaries of the play space. So things like, you can't hide in the garage, or stay in our part of the campsite, or stay out of my bedroom. And then there are the edges and the boundaries of hiding spaces. And finally, the seeker has to remain in a position where they can keep an eye out for potential runners while scanning for hiders. The seeker's walking through a physical liminal space, or a no man's land, between hiding places, while in a critical state of heightened awareness, in other words, on the edge of action, again, a liminal state. Hiders have classified a hierarchy of potential hiding places in terms of their suitability, and the best ones always go first. You also need to know to change hiding places each time, otherwise the seeker will just go and find you. And then there are frantic negotiations about sharing hiding spaces and pleading for ideas of where else to hide, which require a congruent use of your 6 circles. And this is the third model. Now, 6 circles is basically your pragmatic skills. But for instance, players need to know how and when to create a talking space using voice tune and words. "No, you can't come in here. There's no space. Go away." Okay. Or a listening space, in which case you're silent, but you're communicating non-verbally. "Shh, she's coming." And they may need to communicate entirely non-verbally, in which case both parties need to be alive to the meaning of partial communication acts as they are perceived. So they'll be using body language and eye contact and facial expression, but no voice tune and no words. And as a hider, the game entails moving yourself quietly through the play space. That's your social space. Shrinking your personal space up as small as possible. Imagining your concealed body from a seeker's perspective to ensure you're fully hidden. Self-regulating your arousal and activity and tolerating a sustained state of hypervigilance and anticipation. And also maintaining a critical state for quick action and hoping that your perception, motor coordination, and praxis are up to picking a route home and dodging the seeker at speed. And finally, your response to the sudden cessation of high arousal when you reach home will also need to be self-regulated. And you'll be amazed at how many children get home and then burst into tears or have a strop or something, and it's because they cannot self-regulate that cessation of high arousal. As a seeker, you too are moving your body through shared space. You too are hypervigilant, and your multisensory processing is selectively attending to auditory and visual figure-ground relations, and you're switching your attention constantly. You're expending a great deal of energy on simultaneously suppressing your impulsivity and maintaining a critical state for a sudden burst of action. And you will have to tolerate multiple cycles of this state, punctuated by sudden motor effort. So you hope that you find the action self-regulating. You'll also have to reset your focus after successive disappointments as other players reach home without you catching them. And when you do catch someone, you will have to modulate your pressure, your speed, and your muscle tone so as not to hurt them as you make physical contact. Now, if there's a disagreement about whether someone made it home or not, you both have to regulate your emotional states and coordinate all 6 of your circles to make your case as convincing as possible. Or you can go off in a huff and then listen to everyone else either taking sides or ignoring you and having fun. So you may decide to appeal to a higher authority in the form of a facilitator, in which case they might present you with this. This is the second model of see-say-do. As you can see, it's 2 see-say-do triangles put together. Now, they form a me and you, or an us and them perspective. Each person states their case, but you can move people between perspectival positions, literally physically if you have to, so that they are literally taking on each other's perspective. Now, both parties are also involved in saying and doing in the act of explaining and negotiating, etc. So what you're doing is going back to see-say-do, but doing it with 2 people simultaneously. And this is where you get your intersubjective meaning developing. But it's a structured and systematized way of doing it, which means you can use it with more abstract concepts like fair or kind, or all the social constructs that children use, saying it's not fair, he's not being kind, he's being mean to me. But you can now do it to say, well, if he's not being kind, what are you seeing that's not kind? How do you know it's not kind? What is he doing? What is he saying? So if she sees you saying that, what do you mean to be doing? Because that's what she's perceiving. And so you're breaking it down, but you're doing it physically. They are walking. So at the same time, they are physically self-regulating because they're moving. They're not sitting at a table with a piece of paper. And we're not telling anybody off. We're just moving. We're actually making it happen. Now, if a found solution gives rise to continued bad feeling or factions or you always statements, then this thing comes out. This is the 4th model. As you can see, this model, this entire template is based on intersubjective meaning making. And it is also a 2-stage guided system. Stage 1 is where you describe the context, okay, the situation you were in, and the components of the whole problem space. So this whole thing. You identify the participants, and you identify the lack of resources that you might have had, and any contributing events and interactions. And this involves emotional reflexivity, communicating need, working memory, ideation, planning, and execution. So praxis. And in my experience, a significant feature of neurodiverse social cognition is expressed in superordinate constructs like I hate her, or that's gay, or they're troublemakers, and a sustained historical enmity, particularly amongst girls. So when you try to deconstruct a situation, you find that actually nobody actually remembers the events that spawned the anger, and nobody can give you a reason for why the fight is now in its 6th week. But this template has the effect of recategorizing a conflict by shrinking it down from a big picture perspective, like she's a bitch, to an episodic construct with contextual meaning. We had a fight last week because she said I got off with Ryan at Katie's party. This is a particularly useful strategy in the context of social media, and is one I use all the time. Stage 2 is your resolution phase. So the template says nobody solves the problem on their own, and you only ever have to do 1/3 of the work, and this is true. Resources refers to objects, new skills, all the people who can supply them to you. And of course, you have to identify what they are first, which requires classification processes. And then you have to explain what you need and why. That's a task. And in the case of a hide and seek and arbitrators, it would be ideas on how to settle disputes or save face while rejoining the game. And that probably requires going back to see, say, do 1 again and doing a reflection. What do they need to see? What should you say? What do you need to do when you're allowed back in again? And so you jump on the triangle. People refers to anyone involved. That's not necessarily the whole group mind, but you definitely have to involve everybody who considers them part of the dispute. Now, to stop them ganging up, we'll stand the main protagonists on this and use conciliatory language and actions and the 6 circles to enable them to state their case. The point about the 6 circles is the information that you're giving at all times with all these aspects of pragmatic communication has to be congruent. I literally give children 6 circles on a key ring and they carry them around on their belts. And it's really helpful, especially in homes, because you can say to a child, there's your 6 circles, but I'm cross now because your voice tune slipped out and you sounded rude. Can you put your voice tune back so it fits with the words you're using so that I understand what you mean, rather than you making a feeling inside me that's going to get in the way of my understanding? And literally stacking them and then moving them in and out. So to get back to this, people, okay, might also be of help, and other people might also be of help in recalling sequences of events and presenting supporting evidence. And then my task is how you repair the situation, how you solve the problem, and you will have a job to do. Now, it might require some ritual communicative acts like sorry. It might require a rehearsal of what you're going to do next time, which you would do on Say Do 1. And then you can go back and do a do-over. And this is really important in SCAPE. There is always a next time. There is always a do-over. Nothing is ever set in stone. And that means that if you get it wrong, or you haven't understood, or you've upset somebody, there is a way out. It's not something that's going to be a label that's going to be stuck with you. He's always angry. He's always rude. It's not stuck. There is always a do-over. Right. This has been a really quick gallop through about 15 years of work. With a bunch of children. I hope you don't need to lie down. Okay. The next steps from my point of view are to get a book written. I'm writing a book for Taylor and Francis. And then also hopefully train enough people to research its efficacy in non-specialist education environments and in families, and particularly for those of young people in mainstream and home education who don't have access to speech and language, occupational camp services. So we will see. There's a list of references at the end here, if anybody is interested in going and chasing down anything that I've said. It's a very short list. I've got 197 others if you really want them. Okay. But basically, that is Scape. Thank you for listening. I'm not sure if you're any wiser, but would anybody like to ask questions? I'll stop screen sharing, I think. We can always go back.
Just wanted to say how brilliant that was, Sandy. And I don't know if I understood a great proportion of it, but what you've done is whetted our appetites, I think, for something I think that is incredibly original and will be of the future. I feel you're managing to bring in so many different concepts from different models and different domains. Very impressed.
Well, thank you, Harry.
I want to second what Harry said. I mean, I think what you're doing is unique. I don't know a lot of people who understand this population the way you do in such in both such personal and therapeutic terms. Being able to put all this together in a holistic way, I just think it's just really remarkable and really unique. So congratulations to you.
Thank you. It's very kind of you. Does anybody have any questions though? I'm relying on questions because those are the things that make my brain work. So please,
Yeah.
And I need all the help I can get. I can tell you now, trying to put this on paper is something else.
Well, I know you're saying you're writing a book, but is there, for people, I'm thinking of people in working with these children, how can they begin to enter your world of Scape?
Well,
You know, have you done some sort of introductory
I
thing?
have training packages, if you like, which I've done with teachers and with other therapists over the years. But because the school I worked at shut in 2019 after COVID, and I'd actually left in 2018 because there were all sorts of other dramas going on. And then in the end, I left because I thought if I don't leave now, I'm never going to write the thing. And it's been in my head for so long and I need to get it down and out. But I have packages of training. I also have the makings of a manual. The book I'm writing is about the theory. I kind of see it as a set of theoretical manual and then a set of base games. So it's those three are sort of a resources set.
You're using some very sophisticated neuropsychological concepts, which I mean, I can just about keep up with them. But I mean, is it necessary for the teachers to internalize that language to do it?
No, it's not. I mean, this is the thing. I'm trying to take this and make it simple. I'm trying to make it so that you can look at a see-say-do triangle and go, okay, so you know, you're sitting and looking at a see-say-do triangle, and you know that you just need to say to a child, if I see you doing this, what is your body saying to me? And what do you want me to do if your body's saying this? It's that this is not rocket science, folks. This is not rocket science. This is the stuff you do with small children.
But it is rocket science.
Big children.
You are talking about everyday, quite childlike or childish things in a very sophisticated theoretical framework.
But you don't. The thing is, a therapist, whether it's a clinical psychologist or an OT, you don't need to know that. You need to know that there is theoretical background, and there are actually, I think that at last count there were 234 references in the back of the book. If you really want to read them, help yourself. Okay, I've done it for you though, so it's not necessary. But the point is, what you can do now is you can go, right, we're going to do Scape. This is the opening session. We're going to do self-regulation, and we're going to do it for 2-3 sessions until everybody has a clear idea of how they're going to self-regulate themselves when they're in Scape group. Then you'll move on. And it's a sufficiently long time, 24 sessions, I mean, by session 6, everybody is self-regulating. Honestly, I've never had a group that's gone beyond session 6. And you may have 1 or 2 children, particularly children with ADHD, who are, it's an experimental space. They are experimenting with self-regulation. But because it is an experimental space, if it goes wrong, you can see, say, do what happened and what you will do next time, what feels better. The point is, nobody fails in SCAPE, and there's no wrong, there's just different. The whole classification section is, the whole classification domain is based on what's the same, what is similar, and what is different. And there are all sorts of forms of classification, categorization, hierarchies, you name it, and polarities, you name it. There's lots. But the point is, you're only ever looking at what is the same, what is similar, and what is different.
I
now,
can
if you
smell
only
a little.
have to work on that,
I can
it's
smell
way
a little.
easy.
I can smell a little bit of personal construct language there. Is that right?
Oh, just a bit. Yes. Come on, Harry. You know me.
I was interested in how you how you deliver this, or how you train the teachers and your other.
I make them play.
That's the starting point, isn't it, with the training?
That is. I mean, this is really hard to do over here, because if this was a proper lecture theatre, I would actually be getting people up and I would have equipment and you would be doing, you would really be doing. The point is, it's incredibly hard to describe this. What I need is to have groups. I mean, my ideal, honestly, if you really want to know what my life's ambition is to be able to teach on some sort of therapeutic course, either OTs or physios or clinical psychologists or anybody, on training teachers, and teach SCAPE as part of a curriculum, so that they all, especially undergrads, because they're the ones who are going to be working in these fields. These are the ones who are learning the new neuroscience. So this makes perfect sense to them. Yeah. And I would give my ITs to have a group of students that I could take through 24 sessions of SCAPE. And ideally a mix of OTs and physio. But this is, I mean, as Sarah knows, this is because of my background. I mean, I have a very strange set of disciplines anyway. But I was trained in a system where you are working with all these people, and in South Africa you have to be able to do a bit of everybody's job, which is why I think like this. I'm just like a network thinker. I can't help myself. So the point is to be able to train people to think in a network way, in a systemic way, right at the beginning of their careers. That's my ideal.
Once you started to explain the play and the games, I started to understand it. I'm a bit like Harry. I got lost with the beginning. I need to read your theoretical bit several times over to understand it. But once I started to see what was happening,
that's the thing. You don't teach it from the theory.
I started to get it. Yeah.
You give them the handouts on the theory. What you do is you make them play it and then relate the theory. You're doing it like therapy. You're doing it backwards. You're doing well. It's not backwards actually. It's the natural way of doing it. It's to play the concepts and then develop the abstract ideas around your concepts, but it's to actually do it inactively first.
Have you thought about using sort of audiovisual teaching media, you know, like YouTube or something like that? Right?
But I still have to have a group of kids, and I have to have, you know. And the thing is, that's Harry. You know, I stopped. You know, when I stopped in 2018. That whole year was horrible. I lost 2 important people in my life and I couldn't do anything. And then COVID hit. And so this has been written in a kind of a vacuum of interaction, really, you know, of contact. I'm only now allowed to actually go and find herds of children. And now I have to set up the system for doing that. So I'm right on the starting block, really. The thing, well, actually, I'm going to say this in public, it's probably get me shot, but anyway, there is work going on with psilocybins at the moment. Now, psilocybin, magic mushrooms, okay? Psilocybin research stalled in the 1970s, but it's now, neuroscience is now picking it up, and they're working with people with dementias and with head injury, because psilocybin mushroom, the substances in the psilocybin regrow neurological links.
Really?
Now, I can see the need for a system like this, not necessarily escape, but a system that comes from this kind of thinking, which works in tandem with the administration of psilocybins to reconnect contextually the functional aspects of the psilocybin connections, because brain connections only happen in experience. So you need a structuring experience. So, I mean, my son is studying neuroscience, and this is one of the areas that, you know, it's a really up and coming field. And so I'm thinking we need to go back to this idea of things being connected. We understand that in brains now. We understand that they're not independent individual areas of brain function, but there are patterns of connection that create function. So this is just a really rudimentary, rough system for thinking like that. But all the young people coming up, this is how they're being trained. They're being trained with this knowledge of neuroscience. So I don't know what, you know, I need to find some way to start training people. Really, I need to do that work. I need to find a position to do it in, to offer it in. And ideally, I mean, I'm not out to make a fortune. Ideally, you'd offer it, you know, for free or for very little. The other thing about Scape is it's not expensive. Most of the equipment came from Poundland or my house or somebody's garage. You know, we're not talking, this was done in a, you know, in a time of real economic austerity. So it's, you know, it's cheap. So you can do it. You can do it in homeschool. You can do this in a university. You can do this in a school. It doesn't matter. The whole point is this has just got to be practical. That's all it's meant to be, is practical. So, and it isn't rocket science. Once you get started and you're doing it and you know what the key points are to look at, it's exhausting, but it's not difficult. It is exhausting, I have to say that, which is why I want some young therapists, because I'm beginning to feel how tiring it is. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. It's, you know, it's been a real pleasure to actually kind of.
I was just wondering if Trish is there. Trish, can you show your face?
Are you there? Are you lurking?
I'm lurking.
Oh,
let's have
hello.
a look at you.
Long time no see.
This is our colleague from also from Somerset. So it's a Somerset
it's a
version
Somerset contingent.
Yes.
And an Ike contingent. Okay. Yes.
Okay, well, it looks like you're beginning to say you want to finish now, Sandy. Is that right?
I've kind of run out of things to say. And
So are there any other questions from the audience at all? Or comments or anything? What I will do is a couple of things about the series. In 2 weeks' time, the next session, we've managed to get 3 presenters doing their research. So we've got today with us Sarah, who is going to, the 3 of them are going to, unless we change our minds, the rough idea I have at the moment is that you'll have about 20 minutes each, and then perhaps breakout rooms. But Sandy didn't use breakout rooms today, and it's been fine, hasn't it? So we can work that out. But Sarah, your title is going to be Constructing Psychological Safety in a Dangerous Neighborhood, Women's Expression of Continuous Traumatic Stress. I won't ask you to say any more unless you want to make a brief comment on it. Obviously, all our topics hopefully are very sort of relevant to our current life. This is certainly one of them. The next presentation, not necessarily in this order, but Claire Mason you're from the University of Cape Town, aren't you, Sarah?
Yeah.
Claire is from the University of Hertfordshire. She's actually a PhD student with David Winter, and she's going to be looking at radicalization of Brexit activists. So sort of following on from last time's focus on Northern Ireland, we've got another UK exciting set of experiences for us, which hopefully will generalize to other issues in other parts of the world. And the third one is Adria Gabarnet, who works with Guillem Feixas, who was with us earlier, from the University of Barcelona. And he's going to be looking at another topical area, virtual self-identity construed in online video games. So the issue of children spending vast amounts of time on the internet. And that's going to be using a repertory grid method to look at that topic. So don't know if other committee members have any things that we should be saying before we finish. I'm hoping that we're going to get back to the numbers that we were getting in the first series. I think we're still at the end of the sort of summer vacation, aren't we? And people are gearing up to complex university, new terms, or going back to work after the summer break. So I'm hoping that we're going to get more people again. But it doesn't matter how many we have. It's been a very nice session.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much.
Lovely to see you, Gerald.
Yeah.
And you others.
Great.
So shall we finish the recording, Mike?
All right. Great.
Good.